We will begin this discussion with 30-second opening statements from each competitor. Following the opening statements will be 30 minutes of open discussion followed by 1 minute of quiet time for the competitors to prepare their 1-minute closing statement. Official time is kept by the timekeeper. Competitors, in voluntary order, make your 30-second opening statements. Please stand and direct your opening statements to the audience. The timer will indicate when your 30 seconds have elapsed by holding up a red card. You may begin.
Are we?
Yep, you should be good.
Okay. Allowing farmers to have the confidence that they need and the drive to pursue what they do best out in the field, on their farms and on their ranches, is a big step for what the Farm Bureau has allowed us to comprehend. The Farm Bureau is there for the confidence of the farmers, so that they are able to manage what they need to manage. The legal side of everything, the legal side of
farmers and ranchers today face a continually changing regulatory and legal landscape. And some of these can come up quickly and not have a clear way to compliance. And I look forward to discussing with my colleagues today what Farm Bureau can do to help its members face these ever-changing regulations so we can focus on what we should be on our farms and ranches.
Everyone is interested in all of the regulation discussion that's going on in Washington. There needs to be some total transparency going on when these regulations are proposed and initiated and implemented. And Farm Bureau is a pivotal player in that field in making sure that these regulations are something that are sound, based on sound science, and going to work for us so that all agricultural producers across the nation, here in Nebraska and all around the nation, can strive, succeed, and prosper.
I think that Farm Bureau provides farmers and ranchers with the knowledge and the education they need to be able to understand those ever-changing laws and regulations that are put at us that can change what we do back home at our farms and ranches. So I think it's important that Farm Bureau continues to provide that assistance, and I hope that the 6 of us up here can come up with a good solution and ideas to assist Farm Bureau in doing so. I'm excited for the conversation.
Overregulation, am I on? Yep. Sorry, overregulation has been an obstacle for farmers and ranchers for quite some time. These regulations have made it increasingly difficult for farmers and ranchers to produce. Farm Bureau has been at the forefront and should continue to be at the forefront of these conversations to ensure that American farmers and ranchers can continue to feed the world.
There's an old adage that says that when it comes to dinner time, you're either on the table or you're on the menu. You're either at the table or you're on the menu. I think American Farm Bureau does their job to make sure that America's farmers and ranchers each and every day are at the table, and so that we have a voice in what's on the menu. And I think it's our job to make sure that we keep that seat so that we can stay off the menu.
You have heard the opening statements. The competitors may now proceed with the discussion. Competitors, please direct your discussion to your fellow panel members.
I don't know if any of you were at Jordan's discussion earlier, but one of these regulations that I believe has been enacted already was the electronic logbooks in regards to agriculture and livestock and perishable products. I know how it affects me and a lot of you, but I guess what do you think are some ways Farm Bureau can go ahead and maybe deal with these regulations?
I think one of the most important things is when these new regulations are being proposed, Farm Bureau is really good at bringing that information back home. And as Jordan mentioned in his meeting, we are a grassroots organization that works from the bottom up, unlike most other organizations where they work from the top down. And so we can bring ideas and suggestions. And one of the ones that I thought about was, maybe a 60-day comment period before any of these regulations that are overreaching have that comment period out there, so that way the public as a nation can respond before something like this gets passed. So
now that since we were just basing it off of the ELD thing that was mentioned, the Farm Bureau at our annual meeting this year, we did put a resolution that was passed that the Farm Bureau does not support the overregulation that has occurred with the ELD situation. Also, just to touch base, just to clarify a little bit, there was a discussion period for the ELD mandate. Unfortunately, it wasn't discussed enough. There was plenty of discussion. There was a lot of discussion. Coming from a trucking background myself, it was definitely discussed. But the Farm Bureau did a great job advertising. There was some other advertising going on that I had seen online. I'm not going to name names through it all, but they didn't think it affected them until all of a sudden the equine industry got involved. And I feel that the Farm Bureau has done a great job with ensuring that everybody, whether you own one horse or 2,000 head of cattle or 100 acres or 1,000,000 acres of row crops, that you're involved. Your voice matters. Just all you got to do is speak up. And so I just wanted to clarify that a lot of this stuff was touched on, and that the Farm Bureau has already, I shouldn't even say the Farm Bureau, the grassroots area of it, us individuals have already made our presence known with the Farm Bureau from the state level that we don't like this and that the Farm Bureau doesn't support it. So that, at least that, and I feel that that's a great first step to all of this. Regardless of what the regulation is, that the Farm Bureau is already, kind of in our back pocket, I guess you could say. They already stand up for us with it.
Well, that's kind of one of the nice things about, if you look at our organization being a grassroots, our staff don't set policy, they carry it out. And so, like you said, we had a policy in place, so when that comment period came around, our staff were able to jump on it, make comments on our behalf, and it's our jobs each and every day to feed the world, not to be in DC. And so I think a great example on ELD was having our staff step in, having our federal and state lobbyists be the unified voice for agriculture. It
really was. It was the availability that we had in DC, rather than us having to take time away from our operations, whether we're truck drivers or just so we don't have to get a special permit or a device to haul our one horse to a horse show. So it really was. It was incredible to have that kind of something. That kind of weight in D.C. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough, but they're still there fighting.
Right. What I think is really unique about something, I guess you said, was that they didn't care until it affected them. What I find really unique about Farm Bureau, and especially young farmers and ranchers, is you look across the six of us, or even out amongst our audience, every single one of us has a different operation goal, objective. We all do a little bit different things, whether we're all cow-calf or we're all just farming, whatever it is, we all do different things. So the importance of those maybe rank different in our mind. However, Farm Bureau provides us all with a voice. So we could be small fish in a big pond, but ultimately Farm Bureau is making that pond be easier to seek through and be able to provide that voice. So I think it's really unique to have a platform like this that we can all go to and take those policies and let our voice be heard, because not in every industry is there an ability for that. And so I think that's extremely unique way that Farm Bureau has taken an approach to it, which I really think is beneficial.
I would like to expand on that, Eleanor. I think it's very important that we do have a voice, and I think when I think locally with Farm Bureau, we need to not be afraid to speak up and also let our state Farm Bureau staff know what regulations, what laws are actually affecting our operations. It's a great opportunity that we are a grassroots organization, and to keep that, we need to be informing the state what our needs are as well.
I completely agree, and I guess I was thinking more along the lines of not necessarily the new trucking law that kind of the overregulation there, but in some of the other ones that were really high policy overreaches, like WOTUS, those kinds of ones. And even in those kinds of instances, I feel like when they're that large and they impact everyone, and so does the trucking one too, but there needs to be a little more a longer extended period of time, I guess I would say, for those types of comments. And then one of the other things too that I found on the American Farm Bureau website that was talking about the Regulatory Accountability Act. And so there, I think Farm Bureau, one of the things that I would encourage more is maybe updating the APA law that talked about how what was being said continues to not be misinterpreted across the board. And so the Regulatory Act just kind of enhances that to make sure that how Congress intended something to be played out actually gets played out that way, instead of taking it interpretations by unbureaucratic specialties.
Right, and misinterpretation is a huge deal. I mean, we see that across social media all the time. You know, an exclamation point means something different to everybody in every sentence. And so I think that's a great concept there about making sure that the Farm Bureau fights for the interpretation that's intended. You know, a lot of times as farmers, we don't have the right words to say. I think my opening statement kind of clarified that. But we don't know where to go with things a lot of times, and being able to have that legal stance there to take our somewhat fifth grade level and turn it into a doctorate's prescription, it's really nice to have that around. And I think, like the question was asked, what can the Farm Bureau do? I strongly feel like the Farm Bureau's doing it. Like I don't know where to go. I mean, like when you're on top, how much higher can you go?
So I think there is one area that kind of concerns me. We're all really excited now because we got estate tax reform in this last tax reform bill. It doubled the exemption from 5.6 to 11.2 million per person, and it's indexed to inflation and all that good stuff. But it has a sunset provision, and so it's really easy for us right now to get excited about, okay, the estate tax is gone, but it's gone if you have a change in the next 5 or 10 years. So I think the next fight is, how do we ensure that estate tax provision stays a part of the next tax bill, and how do we get that 11.2 indexed to nothing? So I think we're doing a great job, but how do we do more?
I think we can continue to do a great job. And one of the things that I would encourage everybody, and hopefully you have done, is taking advantage of the opportunity to send in an action item on the regulatory piece that you just referred to, Aaron. So if you haven't, I hope everybody goes to the American Farm Bureau website and takes advantage of that. They have it already laid out. So we don't have to be the experts, Chris. We don't have to decide what we should say. They have that said for us, and all we need to do is put our name to it.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, the question asked, what can the Farm Bureau do? Like, I run to a dead end on that. They're like one step ahead of just about everything that you can think of at the moment. They're there for us. They have been, and knowing that they're still there is incredible.
What about when I think of what else can Farm Bureau do, we've mentioned a lot of things that they do great already. But one thing we may lack on, and part of it is funding currently, is what about more legal action? And I think that could take various different forms, whether we have attorneys on staff or have a legal fund to help fund external attorneys that are in a lawsuit that is affecting Farm Bureau members. Do you have any ideas on how we could set that up, or if that's a viable option to help out our members?
I think having a legal counsel available is an excellent option. Whether it's a paid staff legal counsel or just a group of attorneys that's educated and specified in the ag industry on retention. That's an incredible. I'm glad you pointed that out. That's a great idea, and it's something that would be available at a phone call or an email away, explaining what our troubles would be, and we would have legal counsel ready there to back us up. In a heartbeat. That's tied in with the Farm Bureau, to keep it all together. Go ahead. Nope.
Building on that, I think Chris and Jason, you bring up excellent points. We probably should expand on our legal team that we have, of Farm Bureaus. But one thing that I really enjoyed was the fact that I went to the session with Jordan here recently, and this is a guy that was in Washington. He understands, what's happening currently in the governmental system, and he was able to break things down for us and really explain not only what to expect, because that's important, but also what just happened. And so he could really walk us through different things. And so he provided the clarification that's needed. And that's what I really think Farm Bureau does a good job. They provide us with all this education, but they provide us with the grassroots. We keep using that word, but it's the truth. The grassroots of that education. Somebody that was there, knows it, and now can bring it back and put it into words that we understand, because I don't know if I always understand that policy.
Yeah,
And so on that, Luke, I want to see your interpretation of that, because I learned a lot in that last breakout session, and I think that expands so much into what Farm Bureau is giving us as opportunities.
Yeah, that was a great session. Jordan covered a lot of stuff, more than I can honestly remember. But, touching back on the legal end, I do know that we have staff here at Nebraska Farm Bureau and at American Farm Bureau that has fought, HSUS and so forth. And I think, maybe we could expand them more, but I do know, and that we have some on staff, and they do a very outstanding job in what they do.
I think one example of that is Farm Bureau supports AFAN, and AFAN right now is helping a lot of producers in northeast Nebraska as they are trying to work through zoning and permitting regulations as the Lincoln Premium Poultry is trying to get up and going. So there's a direct result of some benefits from Farm Bureau, and I think we just need to expand on that so that there's more resources available.
Yeah, I think one of the things with the overregulation and overreach of some, private organizations in Washington and stuff is maybe not having all of the laws and regulations being based on sound science. As a person who has read a whole heaping amount of literature reviews and all sorts of that type of stuff, I know fair and well just how you can spin literature and research to make it fit an agenda if that's what you're trying to accomplish. And I've learned a lot about that. So I think maybe one of the areas that Farm Bureau could approach a little more is creating some legislation in there that it has to be backed up by factual research from both sides of the aisle to make a sound decision in the middle, so that we can avoid maybe some of those biases that tend to be taking place. What are your thoughts, Brady?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I like the idea of a fully staffed legal department, but I hesitate to fully support legislation through litigation. I think that's a tactic that maybe our friends, and I use that term loosely, on the other side use. So I think that what you said about education, we've got to get back to sound science, and there's the old saying that 99% of statistics are made up, including that one.
I would believe that.
And so it's defining what is sound science, and how do we get, we fight that fight every day, but getting people, A, to agree on what is sound science, B, who, if American Farm Bureau is funding it, well, obviously it has a pro-farm bias. So we've got to nuance that to get around those things, but I 100% agree that we've got to educate not only our consumers and ourselves, but also our legislators.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest part is being with Farm Bureau. I mean, the first word in the name just kind of throws you under a bias right away, like just from a general aspect point of view. Being able to educate people the way that you had mentioned, without taking that bias is very hard to do. I mean, as a farm and ranch community, that's what we are. We're a community, and we want to back each other up. We don't want to see any one of us fail at anything. Might be a little bit wrong, but we want to be there for each other to help you get through it. And so being able to educate people in the aspect of this is a general sound science, peer-reviewed, fact-based situation. This is not just the Farm Bureau saying, that, well, farming's good for everybody. It is, but how? And having the Farm Bureau be able to educate people in that direction, like you'd mentioned, that's a very hard step to take, given the community and the grassroots, the organization that we are.
I think it is, but I think one of the advantages we have is strength in numbers. And so it's cultivating those relationships on the Hill and cultivating those relationships with decision makers within agencies. And I think we've made a great start at that, but there's always more we can do. Coming from Douglas County, I take a lot of pride in the fact that we're the largest Farm Bureau affiliate in the state. However, I'd be willing to bet we probably have, as a percentage, the least ag members. And so I think about just at a grassroots level, we've got so much more work to do. And you look at our state legislature, and over half of them come from Lincoln and Omaha. How much do they know about the problems with the Ogallala Aquifer or with the Republican River Valley? And what are some of those day-to-day issues that we can really dive into and get them not only educated, but also to advocate for our position?
Well, and I think maybe it doesn't, we've been looking at educating others. Sometimes it takes us having to educate them. Just from a farmer's point of view, to get a hold of your senators and stuff, just to explain what it's like in Scottsbluff. They might be from that region, but are they from your backyard? We've got also, like Eleanor mentioned, we're different. Everybody, we're all different. but getting them to understand how different we really are and how they can benefit us both individually and as a group is a very important step. But having that leeway of them not knowing creates an opportunity is what it does, so that you can better understand things. I think that's a great point.
Sorry.
No,
Were you even-
by all
sorry.
means.
I wanted to throw out another suggestion. And the American Farm Bureau had kind of thrown out the idea of maybe limiting a little bit of the social media of still on pending legislation. We had brought up social media just very briefly earlier on. What are your thoughts on maybe why pulling that from social media would be beneficial when the legislation is still pending?
Well,
That's kind of fundamental that the government wouldn't be able to lobby one way or the other. If it's a government organization, they should be looking at the science-based and fact-based information and shouldn't be able to go out and essentially campaign one way or the other. That's not what they're there for. So I think that's very sound policy that the AFBF, the American Farm Bureau, supports, and we should continue to do that. It's also, things like the Equal Opportunity for Justice Act, or Equal Access to Justice Act, that essentially allows environmental groups to get repaid for suing the government. And if we have people that can sue the government without any repercussions, and then when they do win, get paid and not have limits to essentially what they get paid, they are making money by suing the government. And that's just bad policy. So I think we need to continue to affirm, policy that supports restructuring that agreement, that act.
Well, you had mentioned about pulling it from the social media and stuff like that. You had mentioned in your opening statement about transparency. The social media clouds everything. It really puts a big fog over everything, because a person's allowed to express themselves in a way that there is no repercussion for at the time. Other countries, there's huge repercussions for bad mouthing your own government and stuff like that, to where in the United States there's not. And so I think by shortening what you have on social media that's out there that's not truth and fact based yet, I think that creates that transparency that you had talked about, to open that up. That's and that's a big factor in all of this.
And I also have a concern, I guess, letting all that, letting social media happen before the legislative is, solid and sure, because that's where misconceptions could happen. So we could have posts or tweets out there where somebody's saying something on behalf of us,
Right.
but it's not correct, and
Right.
it's not even what the bill's proposed to do. And so I have a concern, maybe where a pullback would be a good thing possibly, because especially in my generation, really in my generation, I have peers amongst that millennial age group that get to run their mouths faster than their minds can think. And so I think that could be an issue at times. But on the same hand, I understand what Chris is saying, because transparency from the beginning, the time that bill or policy is thought about, it should be informed so we can all be educated about it. I have a toss-up between that in terms of what I really strongly feel, but I really am siding towards the pullback being a positive thing.
That's why I think it's excellent that we have publications like Farm Bureau News to help with transparency. Obviously, LB 1022 came out, and if you're not familiar with that, that's the Irrigation Tax Act, which is just absolutely crazy, but it was great to know that Farm Bureau knew everything about it within 24 hours and had a stance, and reassured us that that was one thing we did not have to worry about on our farm at this time. And when it is time, they are going to give us the information and the tools needed to contact whoever we need to and fight that.
Well, and I agree that just that bill in general itself, I don't think it took 30 seconds from that hitting the social media waves to almost implode itself, to where I'd almost be ashamed if I introduced that in a heartbeat, but it was because of that transparency that allowed that to share that, like you said, within 24 hours, I'd say almost anybody with internet access within 24 hours knew about it across the state of Nebraska, whether you're dry land or irrigated. We're dry land 100% on our farm. I don't stand behind that one bit. It's absolutely absurd. But that's where it falls back to what I was saying before, that just because we have a little bit of difference between ourselves, doesn't mean that we don't want, that we don't want to see each other succeed. I want to see the irrigated farmer succeed just as much as the dry land. I wouldn't mind picking up 100 acres from him, but I'm not gonna make sure he gets run in the dirt because of it either. And because of that transparency that's allowed, I'm educated on the situation too, because I'll be honest, if it wasn't for it being brought forward to me like that, it's about irrigation, I really wouldn't even probably read about it because I didn't know any different.
To me, that's one huge benefit of being involved in Farm Bureau is being informed. And I think to expand on your point, Chris, I wouldn't know near what I do that's going on in the government. I would just be going along through life and our operation, being reactive, trying to figure out what the heck am I doing and what do I got to do to meet this. And being involved allows us to take the step first.
Yeah.
So to, I guess to kind of summarize a little bit, we look at getting in front of the regulation, and Farm Bureau has done a great job of that, and then helping to maybe cut off some legislation that would be harmful. But as we think about agriculture for the next 100 years, of our organization, what do you think some issues are that we're going to continue to face above and beyond what we've already discussed and celebrated?
I think one of the key things here is that we have our organizations at the national level in place, like the USDA. The EPA I don't ever see going away as well. So one of the things I would really push for is to make sure that the USDA and the EPA really start getting a close bond. I know that may sound a little like what, but I think it's really necessary because that way we can have a hand in the pocket as far as what is they going to be pulling out next.
Well,
so that way we can have a step ahead of the game.
I think if they like you said, kind of combine and start working together a little bit more, I think that would benefit a lot of people too, because then the Farm Bureau, with our lobbying groups and stuff, they kind of have one blob to work at instead of kind of being pulled two different directions to try and benefit all of us by aiming at two different ways and getting our point across that way. I think if the Farm Bureau could kind of target one area, I think that a lot of resources could be put in one direction a lot better, which would benefit all of us again from that outcome.
And we have some great staff like Ainsley and Rempe and Jordan that are really working on that to make sure that they always give us the top news when it happens. Sorry, you go ahead, Eleanor.
You're fine. Absolutely, Chris. I think I'm blown away every single day at how cohesive our industry works together. It's absolutely amazing. Chris was saying that you might be the absolute opposite of my operation, but yet I'm thriving and I'm excited for you. And so I think if our EPA and our USDA and government at that level could possibly do the same and be working for different goals, but have the same positive, logical forefront, I think that would be an amazing stride we could see. I don't know if you have any ideas, Jason, on that.
I was actually going to go back to Brady's question about what do we see in the next 100 years, and I hate to venture what people are going to see in the next 100 years. If you'd asked that same question 100 years ago, somebody behind a horse and a plow. So I think it's just the takeaway from that would be having staff and having people that are on top of that and futuristic nearly, because I don't think you can box that in.
No, I think proper education would be a big start on that, so that going forward in that 100 years, the children aren't even born right now that are going to run that show. And so being able to carry that over to educate everybody properly so that this all finishes out great for all of us in the end, and our legacy continues behind us is a huge step with all of that.
Building on that, somebody, I can't take credit for this, but somebody in one of the first or second round today said if you would have asked, Henry Ford what his customer was looking for, he would have said a faster horse when he was building the car. And so I think what's something that we really have to think about when talking about our future is the fact that technology is not stopping, and it's going to become even faster and even better and take over even more. And so I hope that we can see our government take a positive spin on that, because we all know the positives and the ability that it can provide for us as farmers and ranchers. So I hope that we not only have a government, but also a Farm Bureau and ourselves that can encompass that and take it under our wing and embrace what's happening, because I think it's an excellent future.
I think you're right. And one of the things that you brought up was the APA, and I noticed that looking at the legislation of that, it's like 70 years old. So maybe there needs to be some updating of that, so that way those misinterpretations and alterations can be avoided.
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. I ask that the audience remain silent for 1 minute to aid the competitors in their preparation. Please put down your pencils. And in voluntary order, please stand and give your 1 minute closing statement.
So as I think back to our conversation today, I kind of boil things down into talking points, and those being that we've got to innovate, we've got to educate, and we've got to cultivate. So as agriculturists, I know that we're going to continue to innovate. It's what we do. It's in our DNA. So as we innovate, we've then got to educate not only our consumers but our leaders on why we're innovating. And we've got to educate them on the best agricultural practices so that we can have a sustainable future. And ultimately, we have to cultivate those relationships with our leaders and with our consumer public. And the only way that we can cultivate that relationship in a unified way is to have one voice for agriculture, and that is American Farm Bureau.
All right, we discussed many viable options here as far as improving the re-regulation and making sure that over-regulation isn't something that's going to continually pound on us. And some of the suggestions brought up with the Regulatory Accountability Act, fairness, transparency, all of this needs to be taken into effect so that way we can make sure that we solidify the futures for all of the generations to come in agriculture. If it doesn't challenge us, it's not going to change us and changes the name of the game.
I think throughout this conversation, we can come to the agreement that Farm Bureau has done and is continuing to do its best in terms of providing farmers and ranchers with the best, the most quick, the current knowledge that we need to have the ability to be proactive about these regulations and legalities. I think that, simply put, that we are Farm Bureau, we are the voice, and that's what's important going forth. We need to be able to make sure we use that voice to support Farm Bureau, what they do on the Hill, what they do in our own capital city in Lincoln, as well as our own hometowns. And I think that's the most important going forward. Thank you for the conversation.
I want to thank everybody for another great discussion. Today's been a lot of fun with everybody. But in conclusion, we discussed transparency, assistance from the Farm Bureau, overregulation, education, and Farm Bureau being the first step for our future. And I feel that after today's discussion, we've kind of got a better grasp on what the Farm Bureau can do and what we need to look for the Farm Bureau to do for us to better handle the legalities of everything while we take care of our own situation on our own operations.
We've had a great discussion today. Overregulation is not going away, but through grassroots organizations such as Farm Bureau and the staff that we have on hand at the state and national level, I believe we can continue and will always be able to stay ahead of the curve.
We had a great discussion today on the topic of what Farm Bureau can do to help its members in the ever-changing regulatory and legal landscape. And I appreciate a lot of the comments, both Chris and Luke, on what we can do at the state level through possibly legal advice that our state Farm Bureau could provide. And Aaron, I appreciate your comments on the national and side with the American Farm Bureau policy and reaffirming what that policy is. And I think the futuristic comments, Brady, on where are we going to be in 100 years, and there's plenty to think about. And I think we take away a lot of action items, both locally on being informed, supporting the Farm Bureau, and informing them of the needs we have, and taking advantage of all the resources out there. So I appreciate the discussion.
Let's show these competitors our appreciation for a job well done. At this time, I will return control of this competition to the room chair.
I'm Brady Revels, live here in Omaha, Nebraska. Grew up on a diversified ag operation in Central Florida and currently work for Elanco Animal Health as a sales representative covering eastern Nebraska.
I'm Eleanor Oftenkamp from North Platte, Nebraska. My parents don't farm or ranch, but I get some agricultural background from grandparents and uncles, as well as through different organizations such as Farm Bureau. I graduated from NCTA out in Curtis in May, and I'm currently studying agricultural education at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So excited to be here.
I'm Erin Norman from Crawford, Nebraska. I'm a teacher at Chadron State College and a registered dietitian. I have 4 kids, 7, 5, 3, and 1, so they keep me pretty busy. My husband and I have a cow-calf operation that I'll let him tell you about, because as much as I would love to say that I help out a ton, I don't really.
I'm Jason Perdue from York County. I actually work full-time in ag retail covering Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri as a territory manager. And then me and my wife have a farm operation where we do row crop, have a small beef herd, as well as a contract poultry farm, and get to help out my in-laws whenever I can. And thank you for having the opportunity to sit between husband and wife.
I'm Luke Norman. Erin obviously is my wife. We have a cow-calf operation in Crawford, and we've just kind of broken into the registered Angus bull market lately.
My name's Chris Neiman. I'm from Butler County. I farm with my dad. We do corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and 150 head of background beef steers. I'm married to my wife, Ashley. We've got a son, Colton. He's 3. He keeps me plenty of busy. And then my wife and I own our own business together, doing commercial and residential cleaning and trucking.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Thank you all for being such a good audience. We appreciate your interest in the competition and for your support of the competitors.